President Trump has just said Iran and Israel don't know what the they're doing. Have you got any response to that?
No, I don't have any response. I have another organized media event in that.
You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
Donald Trump is not happy. We think that might be the first ever on-camera by a sitting president to the White House press corps on the White House lawn. Postcards with your corrections, please, if we are wrong.
Donald Trump can put on a show. We know that. But it didn't seem this time like Donald Trump was acting. He seemed genuinely livid. And he should be. Because last night, he said there would be a ceasefire between Iran and Israel to end the 12-day war. In the end, it looks like it didn't even last 12 hours. Welcome to the News Agents.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis, and we are in The Hague, not the International Criminal Court. We are
About time.
About time, many of our Twitter critics would claim. No, we are at the NATO summit in The Hague, the sort of big annual gathering of NATO leaders. It's day one, although most of the big players, principally Donald Trump, have not arrived yet. So it's a bit of a holding pattern, but it has been built as a crucial summit in terms of ensuring or trying to ensure that Donald Trump remains on board with NATO as an organisation, but is also trying, these different NATO leaders trying to ensure that they get some buy-in from Trump on America's continued commitment to European security. So important to be here, or at least it will be tomorrow.
We're in, perhaps you can see if you watch us in Vision, the press hall, the media hall of the NATO summit, where everyone is having to write corrections to the thing that they literally just posted seconds ago, because the story feels, as ever, to be sort of changing, slightly vanishing, disintegrating before our eyes. And I guess to put this in chronology, we were just sitting here sort of trying to work out the last, 72 hours, let's be generous. So we had that announce of a 2-week bombing pause on Thursday night. On Saturday, Trump had already then decided to bomb Iran. On Sunday, he'd called for regime change. He then announced a ceasefire overnight. I remember reading that at midnight tonight. And by the time I'd woken up, I think it was already broken by Israel, which led to the expletives on the White House lawn.
I mean, extraordinary developments last night, it felt like, with Trump saying that he had negotiated this ceasefire between Iran and Israel in response to what he himself said was a weak attack from Iran on the United States in one of its bases in Qatar. He thanked them for pretty much the weakest retaliation in history. He was completely explicit. We just thought that, yeah.
When we read that out, we were like, oh my God, he's goading them to do more. It felt like somebody who was willing Iran, it's like standing there saying, come on, if you think you're hard enough, right? We thought that was what he was talking about. And then it turns into a mini ceasefire, which evaporates.
Yes, and then we wake up in the morning and find that both Israel and Iran have indeed, they say, agreed to the terms. Netanyahu hails Trump for achieving peace through strength. And then within a few hours, it appears whatever truce there may have been has broken down, because both Israel and Iran have exchanged or have promised to exchange fire, both each other accusing the other of violating the terms of the ceasefire. Trump then makes that extraordinary set of remarks on the White House lawn, where he is, I say, clearly furious with both, not just Iran, but with Israel. In fact, he actually singled out Israel as part of the wider remarks, saying he's particularly irritated with Israel. And then, as soon as he's even on the helicopter, is still on Truth Social, posting almost real-time updates and instructions to both Israel and Iran. So even after that clip, he actually maintains, somewhat bizarrely, that the ceasefire is still holding. He goes to Truth Social and he says, Israel is not going to attack Iran. He wrote this aboard Air Force One. Nobody will be hurt. The ceasefire is in effect. Posting those comments shortly after saying, as I say, he was unhappy with both Israel and Iran, and especially with Israel. I mean, it all gives the sense, you can understand why he's angry, but it gives the sense of a president who is not in control. I mean, he was never going to be in control once he authorized those attacks. He was rolling the dice. But when someone like Trump attaches his reputation attaches his brand, attaches his prestige to something. I mean, he was on Truth Social last night, he was speaking to NBC last night, and he said the ceasefire would probably last forever. An end to the 12-day war, which in one way or another undoubtedly has reached its 13th day.
I think he was a president who was never in control of events, but what he has lost now is the pretense of being in control. And you don't have to be Freud, quite frankly, to work out that on his way to a NATO summit where he's going to confront world leaders, he's probably going to confront Zelensky, he wanted to present what had happened over the weekend as a fait accompli, as the smartest, fastest, shortest war that had achieved its goals within, he said, 12 days. And so the fact that he can't land, he's now taken off. You know, the clip that you saw was him making those remarks, his goodbye remarks, as he got on a plane to head right here to The Hague in the Netherlands. And I think he wanted to feel that by the time he landed, he could face leaders and say, look at me. Yeah, a triumph. Where's the Nobel Peace Prize? And instead, what he's got is just very confused, very frustrated, I think, leaders here. I sort of doorstepped the Finnish Defence Secretary a moment ago, just after those remarks had come out. And I said, well, what do you make of Trump's sort of, explosion? And this guy just looked so sort of defeated by the whole idea that the NATO summit, which should have been prioritising Ukraine, should have been talking about defence spending, should have been talking about Russian aggression, was being pulled down this rabbit hole of, oh my God, what has Trump sort of burped out now, and a real palpable sense that they don't want him to be sabotaging this whole 2-day summit, which has got really strong fundamental issues to try and get their heads round, not least what on earth happens in Ukraine next. And yet they can't do any of that because we're all in this waiting game now. We're literally in this big sort of pen of a waiting room, quite frankly. And until Trump lands and until we get those next on-camera remarks, we're just going to be swayed by whatever we think might be in his mind. I mean, I was listening to the US ambassador to NATO, and when he was asked what he thought about the ceasefire, what he thought about the Middle East, he just kind of put up a hand and he said, not going there. I don't want to read Trump's mind. I don't want to say anything before he lands. They've all put themselves on this kind of, almost like a speech moratorium, a gag order, because whatever they say, we've seen it so often, Trump just contradicts them the moment he opens his own mouth. Yeah,
and we should say, today in a way, this is a 2-day summit. We're here for the 2 days. Today is a bit of a sort of curtain raiser, really, in a sense that Trump doesn't really arrive until tonight. He's going to have dinner with the Dutch royal family. He'll have sort of working dinner as well with other NATO leaders, and there's a sort of family photo. And whatever business is going to get done at this summit, if any business is done, will only happen when Trump arrives. And I think, Emily, in your conversation with the Finnish defence minister, I think it absolutely sums up the tension which is at the heart.
Generous.
Well,
he just looked like he wanted to cry, quite frankly.
Well, you do that to all the people you meet. But it sort of sums up the tension or the difficulty at the heart of this summit, which is that ultimately this is a summit which, as you say, is supposed to be about European security or Western security. It is one which there has been tremendous choreography from Mark Rutte, the Secretary General, to get to this sort of hallowed 5% figure, which maybe we can talk about in a bit more detail. But member states or members of the organisation committing to getting to 5% of GDP. This was all done. This isn't an arbitrary figure. It is in one sense, but it isn't. It came out. It was all done because this was the figure that Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth plucked out of the air and said, "This is where we want NATO to get to." Considerably more, by the way, than where the United States currently is. And this was supposed to be a moment where Rutte and the other NATO leaders could turn to Trump and say, "Mr. President, thank you. You've done exactly what you should have done. You've forced us to act. You've shown this tremendous leadership. And guess what? We've reacted. So please stay in NATO, remain committed, remember who your friends are." But instead, we are in this moment where Trump is profoundly distracted. He's never much interested in NATO. But this moment of all moments where he's not only involved in what is going on in Israel, in Iran, but but he's umbilically involved in a sense that now, since the weekend, he has not just been trying to get to a resolution, but he has taken a policy direction in making those attacks. He has connected himself and the United States with what happened at the weekend and whatever happens now. So he is at best distracted from whatever is going on here, and that is a problem for the people who wanted this conference to be a key staging post in guaranteeing European security by making sure Donald Trump understands what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, Lewis, but I find there is this weird moment where you do genuinely believe what is on his posts, right? So there is a moment where you allow yourself to think, oh my God, maybe this is a ceasefire, maybe this is an absolute stroke of genius, maybe he has solved the most intractable problem in the Middle East overnight. And what I find extraordinary is like you go into this sort of open-minded enough to think maybe it is possible, maybe that was the kind of leadership, maybe he has done things his way, completely revolutionised, how things happen, and you sort of allow yourself to be taken down that path for a bit, and then it all kind of just, it's elastic band that comes back and sort of hits you in the face, and you're like, yeah, sorry, I mean, Israel and Iran, that was not going to be sorted out in 12 hours. And I guess, what we have to say is, let's see, right?
Might still work out.
It
Who
might
knows?
work out, but what it does is it drains the energy from anyone who's actually trying to put a concrete plan in place for anything else, because it does become like this sort of the game show where you're just waiting on the next tweet, the next development, the next little kind of clip from the president. And, going back to the 5% thing, I think it raises a really interesting question because, yeah, on the one hand, European leaders had no choice. And if you ask them, they'll all say, oh, isn't it great? It's great that he showed us the way that we can help ourselves. He showed Europe how to help themselves in NATO. But actually, fundamentally, it's not leadership that Trump's showing. It's an absence of leadership. It's the fact that he doesn't really want America to have anything more to do with that part of the world. He doesn't really want to condemn Putin. He doesn't really want to help Zelensky. And he's saying, yeah, it's your problem now. Now, on the one hand, yeah, fair enough. Maybe that's the answer. Europe gets the message and says, yeah, it is our problem. But the whole thanking Trump for leadership feels to me a little bit of a sop, right?
Well,
it feels a little bit generous.
Well, the thing that I would be worried about is in a sense what they're always worried about with Trump, but an even more heightened sense of that, which is, look, if Trump's angry, if Trump's combustible, if Trump's in the mood to respond badly to stuff because of events that are outside of Mark Rutte's control or any of the European leaders' control, then where might this summit go? Is there a world where he does
suddenly pull out of NATO?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm maybe not that extreme, but when he's in that kind of, in a way, what would have been dreamy for Rutte and for European leaders is if the ceasefire had held for 48 hours and Trump is in magisterial, generous mode, is willing to be flattered, is willing to be, they could hail him as this great peacemaker. That would have, as we know, so much of this does ultimately come down to Trump's mood and his ego. It would have been very helpful. I think what clearly Trump, though, is underestimated with the ceasefire thing is that, as we know, look, he likes these moments of theatre, of showmanship, of, he loves to say, well, it's brought to an end.
Yeah,
he said that multiple
times. War now, so it's the end.
That's it.
It's a bit like folding up the Monopoly board when you've still got like hotels and houses and irons and top hats.
I'm
and
finished
all the
playing
pieces
this
on
game.
Yeah, I'm done. And you just smack it in half and let everyone else clear up the mess.
But of course, it doesn't work like that in international affairs or international diplomacy or politics generally, because it underestimates the structural reasons as to why we got to this point. And one of those key structural reasons is that Netanyahu, much as he didn't want an Iranian deal, and much as he didn't want peace with Iran, he actually wanted this war. He sees it as a generational moment. He didn't want it to stop now. Israel and Netanyahu have been thrilled because they think that they are achieving the maximal military objectives that Netanyahu has long had. So why would you stop then at that moment? Of course, you go through the pretense that you are, but any moment that you can resurrect it, then you would. In Iran, much the same. It's just that they're coming from a moment of weakness, so they're more keen to genuinely end it, at least for now.
Yeah, particularly when there was that little chink of light, and Netanyahu's thinking Trump wanted regime change in Iran too, which is obviously what the Israelis what the Israeli government would welcome. I was just talking to an Israeli TV broadcaster here a moment ago, and I said, what's been the reaction?
You can find any from pretty much any country here at the moment.
Anyone,
it's very,
anyone,
very
but
easy.
you have to sort of tune into the language. And he was on air, and I said, what's been the response to those remarks from Trump? And he said, Netanyahu has sensibly put all his cabinet in lockdown, so nobody is allowed to talk to the media. Again, in the same way that Trump, manages people. Don't talk to the media about this. And I said, but would Netanyahu be offended? Would he disobey Trump? And this, TV broadcaster said, no, I don't think he'd be offended. He kind of knows he needs Trump, and he'll finish whatever business Israel's got to finish, but they still need Trump. They still think that Trump can help release the last hostages that Hamas has got in Gaza. And so it was almost the suggestion that for Netanyahu, that stuff is water off a duck's back. And that's when you suddenly realise how sort of similar I think they are in sort of personality. They're both quite volatile. You could say that Netanyahu is probably more polished and Trump is probably more raw, but they're quite similar in terms of the way that they deal with the media.
Yeah, I think this is a big test now for. I think this is a big test now for the power. Whatever power Trump might have over Netanyahu, it is a big test of Trump's will to exercise that power, and whether Netanyahu is going to be responsive to it, or whether, much as we saw with the Biden administration, the Israelis will pay homage. They'll do a certain amount in terms of the words, they'll sort of play along, but when it comes down to it, if they think there's a genuine strategic imperative, they will ignore an American administration, whether it's Democrat or Republican.
Yeah, because Trump is right now working out who listens to him and who doesn't.
Yeah.
Putin does not listen to Trump, right? Which is why Trump comes in thinking he can, tell Putin what to do and tell Zelensky what to do, and only one of them is willing to listen, and it isn't Putin. And now he's basically having the same conversation with Netanyahu. Does what Netanyahu wants to do in Iran outweigh the value that he thinks Trump can be to him? And I guess that's what hangs in the balance right now. In a moment, you'll hear from those on the floor we've been catching up with. Big voices from the US and also from Germany. That's all coming up. It is almost impossible to do an interview here at the NATO summit because every time you read about a ceasefire or a putting down of arms, something changes the narrative. I'm about to speak to Benedikt Frank. He's the vice chair of the Munich Security Conference, and even he isn't entirely sure where we are right now.
If it is true that Israel has now agreed to this ceasefire deal, I think it's pretty historic.
No, I mean, it's just said that it's going to retaliate. It's just in the last few minutes. Israel said it's going to retaliate against further Iran strikes. So it thinks that Iran has broken the ceasefire already.
Oh, that's not good then. Yeah, so it is pretty confusing.
Right.
Then I was right, actually. Thank you. Because I could not see that this would last any time, because the structural things haven't changed. I mean, the Iranian leadership is still intent on destroying the state of Israel. Netanyahu still needs to defend themselves against threats from within and without, and the most dangerous of them is Iran, independently of nuclear weapons. So it really did surprise me that this was over so quickly.
Do you think that was just Donald Trump deciding that he wanted it to be over without any agreement from the other parties?
See, so I have some sympathy for Donald Trump here. Once again, his disruptive way of doing politics may have opened a window of opportunity. I mean, we all agree that, an agreement between Iran and Israel on cessation of hostilities now and forever would be a great thing. If he'd managed that, I would have given him the Nobel Peace Prize he so craves. But if this was just show, then that obviously isn't so good.
One of our former leaders, Conservative leaders in the UK, William Hague, is suggesting that actually this whole episode has taught future Iranian leaders of the need for a nuclear bomb. It's had the opposite effect to the one intended.
So I think there are two ways to look at that. I mean, William Hague is right very often, and he may be right here, that the kind of people that are close to the current regime may draw that lesson. But there may be the opposite lesson from people that are a little further from the inner circles of this regime, that the reason why they're constantly in the middle of trouble, the reason why everyone pounces at them, both physically and rhetorically, is because of this constant attempt to get nuclear weapons. And if you were just giving up on it, you may be in a totally different place. Iran could be such a rich and successful country. It could be a beacon of stability in the Middle East and not what it is now, the source of all trouble. So I think you could draw the exact opposite lesson of what we've just seen.
We're gathered for the next 2 days at The Hague at the NATO conference, and I wonder whether you feel that actually NATO, for all its power and might, has no agency in the biggest conflict going on right now, which is between, seemingly Iran and Israel and America. NATO's on the outside just watching it like a spectator.
So what the NATO Secretary General just said when I interviewed him on stage a couple of minutes ago was that they're looking at this situation very closely, but then again, NATO is a purely defensive alliance. There currently is no threat to an alliance member. No Article 5 has been discussed. So why would this have to be a topic here? We must not let the Middle East overshadow the key problem that we currently have, and that is Russia, that is the attack on Ukraine, and that is the future of a free Ukraine. And so let's not get diverted by the Middle East.
President Zelensky is arriving here later tomorrow, I think. What is he hoping to hear from the leadership here, from NATO members?
So we had the Ukrainian foreign minister with us last night for a dinner, and he said he wants 3 things from the summit. He wants a public moment for the president. It is really important for Zelensky to be here and to send a strong signal to Russia that despite all the talks, despite the media, NATO is sticking with Ukraine and the US is sticking with Ukraine. That's number 1. Number 2, he wants concrete commitments. He must get further support, concrete support. And 3...
Which is what?
I guess it is, and we've already seen a couple of countries announcing production facilities in Ukraine, industrial cooperation.
President Zelensky has said in the last 24 hours sanctions aren't working against Russia. They're not injuring him. They're not injuring Russia. They're not making things harder for Putin. He doesn't see a joined-up plan here that's actually working.
So I believe it would be dangerous to hope that suddenly we'll come up with sanctions that work. Sanctions have hardly ever, if ever, worked. They just don't. Hoping that suddenly India and China will change their policies won't work. That means...
But even British businesses, this is what Zelensky was saying, even the countries that he thinks are supporting and on side have found ways to trade with Russia.
Yes, but I don't think that is the problem. The problem we need to sort of tackle is that we have left Ukraine out in the cold. Not that we're still doing a little business with Russia. We need to give them what they need. We need to, combine our industrial uprise with theirs. There are so many things we can do. Again, let's not get diverted by all these, red herrings out there. Let's pounce on support for Ukraine.
So Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary General, has made it very clear he wants a 5% commitment from NATO members. Everyone is hailing this as a moment of victory for Trump's leadership. Would you concede that it's actually not leadership, it's the absence of leadership that is making NATO members have to think like this?
So, okay, let's start with the following. I think President Trump needs to be commended for having put so much pressure on the Europeans. He got us to do what we wouldn't have done without him. I may not like the style personally, I may not like some of the wording, I may not like this pay-as-you-go attitude, but at the end of the day, taking a step back, his insistence and his pressure has forced us Europeans to get our act together and to pay up. Whether 5% is the right number.
And you thank him for that? Is that what you're saying? You think that's American leadership?
No, I think that is Trump putting pressure on Europe at a time when we need this pressure. Am I thanking him? I'm grateful to the Americans for having stuck with us for so long and having now slowly but surely raised the pressure. I do believe we need that pressure. Without it, we wouldn't have done anything. Look at Germany. We're now talking about a quadrupling of our defense spending within a couple of years. This is historic. And now I ask you, would that have happened without the exotic way of President Trump? It didn't happen under President Biden.
And it
didn't
may not
happen.
happen.
But yes,
it may never happen because it's
true.
10 years away and Trump may be long gone and maybe this
But
is all
look,
just
Germany said they're going to do it till 2029. So within the time that Chancellor Merz will be in power, Germany has already increased by many billions. So stuff is happening. We see enormous developments, and I think there is no way to ignore that.
And Frank, thank you very much. Senator Sheen, can we have a very quick word with you about the words that your ambassador just said on the stage now? That
I didn't hear them.
He just said, he reconfirmed America's commitment to NATO. Is that something that you can buy?
Oh, absolutely. That was a question that I asked Ambassador Whitaker at his hearing when he was being nominated, was whether he was fully behind NATO, whether he believed we should support the Article 5 commitment, whether we should keep troops deployed on the eastern flank, and he said yes to all of those questions. So I think that support is unequivocal. It's certainly unequivocal in Congress. There is strong bipartisan support for NATO.
And where do you think Trump's commitment is to Ukraine right now?
I think he is beginning to recognize that he has been played by Vladimir Putin, and so hopefully that means he will increase the support for Ukraine. He will look at supporting the sanctions bill that's in the Senate that has 82 co-sponsors, bipartisan co-sponsors, because we need to change the dynamic. We need to put pressure on Vladimir Putin and Russia to come to the table to get a real peace deal and to stop militarizing.
And what does that mean in terms of actually supporting, actually financing Ukraine with weaponry or whatever they need now?
Well, I think we should certainly do that, continue to do that. I appreciate the commitment that Europe has made, that the NATO partners have made, and we will continue to have those discussions.
Do you believe his heart's in it?
You'll have to ask him.
Can I ask you where we are with the ceasefire, non-ceasefire in the Middle East? Have you got any sense of that?
All I know is the reports that I see.
Do you think this is going in the right direction? Do you think that the action that the US took in Iran was right?
I think if we can eliminate Iran's ability to have a nuclear weapon, that would be very positive. I don't think their support for terrorism across the Middle East and across the U.S. And Europe has been a positive attribute for the global community. I think their interest in a nuclear weapon is very concerning for all of those countries who are threatened by Iran. And so we will see what happens next.
It was an action taken without the backing of Congress. Was that right?
Well, I have been very vocal about saying that Congress should have been informed and should have had a chance to hear what was being planned. Unfortunately, the president didn't do that.
But you back America's actions in Iran. You back what Donald Trump did.
I think whatever we can do to set back Iran's nuclear ambitions is a good thing.
And if he went after the supreme leader now?
I don't think that means regime change, and we have heard that that's not the position of the Trump administration.
Senator Shaheen, many thanks. Thank you.
So before we go, we thought we'd bring you a story, really important UK story, although there is, as we'll explain, a link to what is happening here in NATO, which is about the fate of the government's proposed welfare reforms. So this is the $5 billion or so that the Treasury intends to save from the Department for Work and Pensions, headed by Liz Kendall, principally on personal independence payments, PIPs, payments which are designed to help people who are living with forms of disability, and some other welfare reforms too. As I say, it's supposed to save about $5 billion. It has been a source of deep angst on the Labour backbenches. And it transpired today that more than 108 Labour MPs have signed their names to a Commons amendment that would basically halt the government's welfare reforms in their tracks. And 108 MPs, the government's got a huge majority, 165. But if those 108 were actually translated into rebels when it comes up for a vote in a week's time, then the government would lose in the House of Commons, which would be humiliating for Keir Starmer on such an important bit of legislation with such a huge working majority.
Yeah, and this amendment is basically being described as the brainchild of Meg Hillier, not somebody you think of as one of the sort of firebrand rebels, very much on the sort of, whatever is the reasonable flank of Labour.
Respected backbench MP.
A very respected backbencher, and the amendment says that it declines to pass the government's welfare changes and it calls for a pause, including for further consultation, partly because the government's own assessments were of the kind of damage that this could do if people didn't get back into work. So it is an extraordinary moment for Starmer because once again he's been put in a position where his own party is saying, we actually just don't like the policies you're coming up with, and we didn't come into government as Labour MPs to vote to make disabled people poorer. We saw it over winter fuel, we saw what happened there, we saw a reversal, which so far doesn't particularly look as if it's done Starmer any favours in the polls or amongst older people. And Starmer's response, I think, at this stage has been to say, whatever, it's staying. I'm not going to pull this bill. We thought at one stage he would pull the bill. He's now saying that he won't. I mean, I don't know whether you'd be sort of feel safe saying that there is not going to be a U-turn on this, but it sounds as if the government feels it has to dig its heels in on this because it can't be seen as the government that changes its mind from one month to the next.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, politically, in terms of the polls and so on, there may be no benefit to it, although actually welfare reform in the round is quite popular among the public. But the thing that could really, the only thing at this point that could really force a government like this to make a U-turn is the prospect of a Commons defeat. I mean, if it really looks like they might get defeated on this at the floor of the House of Commons, that would be so crippling to Starmer's authority. As I say, to lose majority that big over something that they've put great store by. I mean, the problem is, I mean, as you say, I mean, he said today that they're going to stick with it. I mean, in the end, if the chief whip were to believe that they didn't have the numbers, then I think they would have absolutely no choice. They would have to pull it, and then sort of, it would be humiliating, but not as humiliating as actually losing a vote. I mean, there is as I say, a sort of connection with what we're talking about here, which is that, $5 billion, which the Treasury has earmarked for this saving, it's not an insignificant amount of money. And on the same day that Starmer is saying, at least, that we will get defence spending up to 5% of GDP by 2035. Now, that figure is a little bit bastardised because...
Somewhere between 30 and 40 billion,
it's about 30 billion, exactly.
Extra.
That 5% is a bit bastardised because it includes 1.5% of so-called other sort of related defence spending. It could be on defence infrastructure and all sorts of things. Security, that we wouldn't necessarily consider to be traditional kind of boots on the ground, tanks, bullets, bombs, drones, that sort of thing. But nonetheless, still to get anywhere near that figure, as you say, is 30 billion. And if the government, with all of its wider fiscal constraints, is struggling to even save 5 billion from the welfare bill, which, by the way, is projected even with these reforms to go up in the years to come, then you are really struggling to make any kind of fiscal sense of all of the sort of many pulling imperatives that are coming the government's way.
Yeah, and I guess if you flip that on its head, there'll be people who say, are you kidding? You're going to find another 30 to 40 billion over the next decade, but you can't actually find 5 billion to keep, disabled people in a place of anything like relative comfort.
And indeed, Starmer was asked about that precisely today, where he was forced to deny that the government is balancing the books or saving money off welfare to pay for defence. But in a sense, of course, will be. Everything is. The problem is that the problem politically Starmer is finding here is simply that, there is a lot that Labour MPs from different factions of the Labour Party disagree about. One of the things that unites most of them is that even if they can see the intellectual case for welfare reform, which is strong, even if they can see the financial case for welfare reform, which is strong, there is just something about your median Labour MP, something in their bones, which thinks that we didn't come into politics to do this. We didn't come into politics to take welfare away from people. Even, it's sort of the equivalent of when the Conservative Party, for whatever reason, are forced to put up taxes. It is just something that just turns their stomach.
But also, it's, any vote can be traced back to you for years and decades to come. So in the way that we are still now looking back over how did people vote on Iraq, how did Tories vote on the bedroom tax, this could be something that people just don't want on their voting record because it speaks volumes to the public when they're trying to work out what side of the argument you're on.
It definitely feels like one of the biggest domestic political problems that Starmer has faced yet.
We'll be back tomorrow, and so will Starmer. Well, he'll definitely be here. We hope
Somewhere.
He'll be here, but he'll definitely be here.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.